I returned home unannounced. After completing my last mission, I discovered my son was dying alone in the intensive care unit. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law was partying with her friends on a yacht in the Sea of Cortez. So I immediately froze all the accounts. An hour later, she went crazy when she found out. I'm glad you're here. Stay until the end and tell me from which city you're watching my story. I want to know how far it's come. I stepped into La Paz International Airport just as the sun began to peek out, a golden light streaming through the terminal's large windows. The old military suitcase, worn at the corners, rested at my feet like a faithful traveling companion of more than 40 years. On my wrist, my father's pocket watch gently vibrated every time I moved, as if reminding me of the promise I made to myself in my youth, to always return home. That promise weighed more than ever. Now, at 61, recently retired from my last tour of duty, I had dedicated my entire life to the Mexican Marines. From hostage rescue operations in Houston to endless days evacuating people during that devastating earthquake. But today, I just wanted to be a mother. Eager to hug Miguel, my son, I dragged my suitcase out of the luggage area with the same speed and precision as always. Outside, the morning sun was already beginning to scorch. I raised my hand to hail a taxi. I got in and said to the driver, 420 Las Palmas Street, please. I tried to keep my voice calm, but inside, emotion pounded me like the waves of the nearby ocean. I imagined Miguel opening the door with a radiant smile, sitting us down at the table, and talking about everything I'd missed. In just half an hour, I'd be on my way with my son. The radio blared with news from the Navy, reports I'd once heard daily, but now meant nothing to me. Yesterday, I had concluded my last mission as a strategic advisor for NATO on a counter-terrorism operation in South America. A 40-year career, from stopping arms smuggling at the border to sleepless nights in the jungle, was now like distant memories. I gazed silently out the window. The blue ocean stretched endlessly. The waves glittered, as if trying to drag me back to those days. But my mind was only on Miguel and the small house where I had placed so many dreams. The taxi took the familiar coastal road, where the palm trees were still swaying, just like the day I left. But when it stopped in front of Miguel's house, I felt a lurch in my chest. The house was dark, the curtains were closed, not a single light was on. I carried my luggage up to the porch, a gnawing unease growing inside me. I rang the doorbell. The sound echoed in the silence, with no response. I knocked harder, and again. Nothing. A strange silence, as if the house had been abandoned. I went down to the garden and looked around. The mailbox was full of crumpled flyers. They piled up on the path as if no one had cleaned it in a long time. My heart raced. A dark feeling weighed on my chest. I had punctually sent money to Miguel and Valeria, my daughter-in-law, to support the family. I thought everything was going well, that my son was living without problems. But now, in front of that cold house, I wondered what was going on. Just then, I saw Doña Teresa, Miguel's neighbor, watering flowers across the street. She had lived here since I was young, always friendly, and telling stories about the neighborhood children. I shouted, "Doña Teresa!" She raised her head, her eyes wide in surprise. "Valentina! My God, you're back, but you haven't noticed a thing." I hurried across, my legs almost shaking at the sound of his voice. "What about?" "Where's Miguel?" I asked, trying not to let my voice crack. Doña Teresa put the watering can on the floor, her eyes filled with compassion. "Miguel has been in San Rafael Hospital for 2 weeks. The ambulance came at midnight. I clearly saw the logo on the vehicle." She stopped and continued in a lower tone. "And Valeria, my son, told me he saw a post of yours on social media. He's partying on a yacht in the Sea of Cortez." I froze, as if the whole world had collapsed beneath my feet. Miguel was in the hospital. 2 weeks later, and Valeria, my daughter-in-law, to whom I entrusted the care of my son, was partying on a yacht. I felt the blood stop flowing through my veins, my heart pounding with painful stabbing pains. "Do you know where San Rafael Hospital is?" I asked, in a hoarse voice. Doña Teresa nodded and showed me the way. Without another thought, I stepped out onto the street and raised my hand to hail another taxi to San Rafael Hospital. As fast as I can, I told the driver, almost in an orderly tone. Dozens of questions crowded my mind. What had happened to my son that they needed to rush him? And my daughter-in-law? How could she be celebrating a lavish party while my son lay sick in a hospital? Sitting in the taxi, I felt my heart burn in my chest. I gripped my pocket watch so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Miguel, my son, the boy who ran after me on the beach, who hugged me every time I returned from my long work trips, was now in a hospital. And I, the mother who had dedicated her life to protecting the country, didn't even know my son needed me. I blamed myself for the months and years of sending only money, believing that was enough for him to have a good life. But now I just wanted to be with Miguel, to see him, to know he was alive, that he was okay. The taxi stopped in front of the entrance to San Rafael Hospital, and the midday sun dazzled me. I paid the driver, dragged my suitcase through the entrance, and tried to control my breathing to avoid the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. The lobby was crowded, with voices, footsteps, and the PA system calling for patients like chaotic music. I went straight to the reception desk, where a young nurse was reviewing charts. "I'm looking for Miguel Perez," I said in a dry voice, as if each word cost me an enormous effort. The nurse looked up, stared at me for a moment, and quickly flipped through some papers. "He's in intensive care. 5th floor, room 512. She replied in a mechanical tone, as if it were just another routine announcement. I didn't have time to thank her, and rushed toward the elevator. "Please hold the door," I asked, as it was about to close. A middle-aged man reached out to stop her and waited for her to enter the cramped cabin. The pungent smell of disinfectant hit me, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. When the doors opened on the 5th floor, the ICU hallway stretched out cold and silent, broken only by the constant beeping of medical equipment. I walked quickly, my old army boots thumping on the tile floor. The door to room 512 was ajar, and a white light filtered in from inside, making me hesitate for a second. I pushed it slowly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. Miguel was there, on the white bed, surrounded by tubes and machines. His eyes were closed, his face pale, so thin I almost didn't recognize him. The respirator was tight over his mouth. Each breath was so faint that I held my own to hear it. My heart sank. That wasn't my Miguel. He wasn't the little boy who ran after me on the beach, nor the man who hugged me tight every time I returned from a work trip. He was just a shadow, a shattered version of my son. A doctor stood in the corner of the room with a nameplate that said Julian. He checked the indicators on the screen, his gaze focused but cold. He turned to me and asked, "Are you related to the patient?" I nodded, my voice breaking. "I'm the mother, Valentina." He nodded slightly, pointing at Miguel. "He has terminal stomach cancer. The situation is very serious. If it had been treated sooner, perhaps it would have been different." His voice was flat, as if he were talking about an ordinary case, but each word was a knife in my chest. "Cancer. Terminal stage," I repeated, my voice trembling, not believing what I was hearing. An hour earlier, I had imagined myself hugging him, listening to him tell me about his days without me. I thought I would see him healthy, smiling, not like this, trapped among lifeless machines. How did this happen? Why didn't anyone tell me? I asked, almost pleading. Dr. Julian shook his head with a flash of compassion. No one has come to see him since he was admitted. We tried to contact the family, but it wasn't possible. No one came to see him. That sentence hit me right in the chest. Valeria, my daughter-in-law, the one I trusted to take care of Miguel. Where was she? I remembered Doña Teresa's words, the social media post, the yacht, the parties. Rage burned through me, but it was drowned out by pain. I approached the bed and took his cold hand. His skin was paper thin, with prominent blue veins. "Miguel, it's Mom," I whispered, holding back tears. I'm here now, son. Suddenly, his lips moved, his eyelids fluttered, and he opened his eyes. They were cloudy, but with a familiar glow. Mom, he murmured so faintly that I had to lean in to hear him. Mom, I love you. Before he could finish, the heart rhythm machine emitted a long, high-pitched beep, cutting through the air. I clung to his hand. Miguel. No, son, I screamed, but Dr. Julian pulled me away, calling for the nurses. Get out. Let us work, he ordered firmly. They led me out into the hallway. I looked out the window as the nurses ran. Machines rang. Urgent voices. Everything was mixed together. I covered my face, crying uncontrollably. Please don't take him, I repeated, as if that would keep him back. But minutes later, Dr. Julian came out. He took off his gloves and shook his head. I'm so sorry, he said in a deep voice. We did everything we could. I felt myself emptying out. My legs gave way, and I staggered out of the ICU, not daring to look at the white sheet covering his face. Miguel was gone. Just when I got back, I didn't have time to tell him how much I loved him, or how sorry I was for leaving him alone. I stood in the hallway, under a cold white light, feeling an immense emptiness, as if the whole world had collapsed. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and dialed Valeria's number. On the other end, I heard loud music, laughter and voices, as if I were in the middle of a party. What's going on? Valeria replied in a dry tone, without the slightest interest. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Miguel died. There were a few seconds of silence, and then he answered as if he were talking about the weather. Okay, I'm busy. We'll talk later. The call ended. I froze. The phone slipped from my hand and fell to the floor. Valeria didn't ask anything. She didn't show any sadness. She was celebrating while my son had just taken his last breath. I turned around and walked toward the hospital exit. Outside, the sun was still shining, but I only felt cold, a cold that chilled me to the bone. I had lost Miguel, and now I knew I had also lost faith in the only person I'd ever called family. Valeria, whom I believed would take care of my son, had betrayed us in the cruelest way. I walked out the door of San Rafael Hospital. The midday light hit me full in the face, but all I felt was a cold emptiness inside. My legs felt heavy, as if every step were an effort to keep from collapsing. I don't remember how far I walked, only that I had to get to the administrative office to process Miguel's death certificate. The word death echoed in my head like a hammer blow, shattering any remaining hope. My son, the boy I raised and loved with all my heart. Now it was just a piece of paper, a stamp, a name in a hospital file, in the administrative office. A young nurse with her hair tied back in a high ponytail handed me a clear plastic bag. These are Mr. Perez's belongings, he said in a soft but hurried voice due to the routine of a workday. I took the bag with trembling hands and peered through the plastic. Inside was Miguel's watch, the worn leather wallet I gave him for his 20th birthday, and his phone with a scratched screen. I opened my wallet, hoping to find something of hers, a trace of the life she had lived, but it was empty. Only his documents and an old photo with wrinkled corners remained in the image. Miguel and I were at the beach. He was just a little boy, with a radiant smile and a red kite in his hand. I clutched the photo to me, as if letting go of it would fade the memories of my son. I also asked the doctor to give me Miguel's entire medical history. Another doctor? Number. Dr. Julian came in with a thick file in his hand. Here's the entire medical history, he said, placing the pile of papers on the table. I flipped through the pages, admission dates, tests, and the final diagnosis. End-stage gastric cancer with metastasis. I stopped. My vision blurred as I read that line. The doctor next to me lowered his voice. If he'd been brought in a few months earlier, he might have lived a year or two longer, but by the time he was admitted, his condition was already too serious. I nodded, speechless, feeling my chest tighten. a year or two. If I'd been home, I would have paid more attention to him. If he hadn't let Valeria take care of everything, Miguel would have had a chance. "Who's the primary contact person?" I asked hoarsely to the on-duty nurse standing nearby. She checked her notebook and answered, "Valeria Lopez. We've called and texted several times, but we haven't been able to reach her." I froze, as if I'd been slapped. Valeria, the same one I sent money to every month, the one I trusted to take care of Miguel. He didn't show up. Not only had he abandoned my son, but he didn't even respond to the hospital's attempts to reach him. I closed my fists, digging my nails into my palms until they burned. At that moment, Miguel's phone vibrated inside a plastic bag. The screen lit up with the name Valeria. I stared at that name, my heart beating a mile a minute. Part of me wanted to answer back, to yell at him, to ask him how he could be so cruel. But I didn't. I couldn't face his cold voice. Not after everything I'd been through. I let the phone ring until the screen went blank. Then I stuffed the bag into my purse and left the administrative office. I went to the morgue where Miguel had been taken to prepare him for the funeral. The employee handed me a document asking me to sign it so it could be taken to the military funeral home. I took the pen, but my hand was shaking so much that the signature was a scribble. "Are you okay?" the man asked, looking at me with concern. I nodded, but I knew I wasn't. How could I be when I'd just lost my only son? I finished signing. I stood up and left the morgue, feeling like each step dragged a huge stone. As I left the hospital, I finally let the tears fall. I stood by the sidewalk, the sun burning my shoulders. But I felt nothing but pain. Pain for Miguel, for having endured his final days alone without his mother by his side, without anyone to hold his hand. I blamed myself for the years I spent absorbed in work, on my missions around the world. I thought sending money was enough, that Valeria would take care of him. But I was wrong. The biggest mistake of my life was leaving my son in the hands of someone like her. Amidst the pain and remorse, Valeria's image reappeared. Sharp and cruel. I remembered her sharp voice on the phone, the loud music, the laughter on a yacht. She spent my money, the money I sent to take care of Miguel, on luxuries while my son was fighting death. Not only did she abandon him, but she was indifferent to the knowledge that he had died. That cruelty was like a sharp knife, cutting me from the inside, filling me with pain and rage. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to ask her why she treated Miguel like that, but I knew it wasn't time yet. I had to stay calm and do what was best for my son, even though he was no longer here. I took out my phone and dialed the number of Lieutenant Colonel Javier Ortega, an old friend from the Army who now worked at the Military Financial Administration Agency. "Javier, I need to see you today," I said firmly, even though tears were still streaming down my cheeks. "Valentina, what's wrong?" "Are you okay?" he asked with concern. "I'll tell you when we meet." "Please get me an urgent appointment." Javier immediately agreed and asked me to come to his office in the late afternoon. I hung up, feeling like I'd just found a small fulcrum amid the storm engulfing me. I took a taxi and returned to Miguel's house at 420 Las Palmas Street. Sitting in the seat, I gripped my father's pocket watch tightly, the same one I've carried with me for 40 years. It was the symbol of the promise of returning home, but now he knew he had returned too late. In front of Miguel's door, I felt the bunch of keys jingle softly in my hand as I searched for the right one. My fingers touched a small, icy key, the one I had kept all these years like a thread that kept me connected to my son. I opened the door, and a musty, closed-in smell hit me head-on, as if the house had been long forgotten. I flipped the switch and the yellowish light illuminated a messy room. Wine glasses with dried remains were scattered on the table. Dust covered the wood, and empty fast food boxes were piled on the floor. I stood there, staring around. This had been Miguel's home, the place where I thought my son lived happily with Valeria. But now it was nothing but chaos, just like my heart at that moment. I dragged my suitcase, left it next to the old sofa, and walked over to Miguel's desk in the corner. A brown envelope lay among the papers. I opened it and felt my heart pound as I scanned the bills inside, one by one. One clearly stated, yacht rental, Sea of Cortez, $150,000. Paid with Miguel Perez's credit card. The date was last week, right when Miguel was in the ICU. I flipped to the next one and my blood boiled. Cartier jewelry, $195,000. Dated 3 days ago. I gripped the paper so tightly that my nails dug into my palm. Valeria had used my son's money, the money I sent to take care of him, to rent a yacht and buy jewelry while Miguel fought for his life. I took out my phone, photographed every bill, every figure, every date, and carefully filed them away in a separate folder. Each click felt like a stab in the chest, but I couldn't stop. I needed proof. I needed the truth to confront Valeria. I opened the video calling app and dialed her number. The screen lit up, revealing Valeria standing on the deck of a yacht with the deep blue sea in the background and her friends laughing out loud. She was wearing a silk dress with a huge Chanel logo on the chest, expensive sunglasses, and a cocktail in her hand. That image was like a slap in the face. "What's wrong?" Valeria asked in a distracted tone, as if I were bothering her. I took a deep breath and kept my voice as calm as possible, even though I was burning inside. "You know Miguel is dead, and yet you're still so calm." Valeria's face froze for a few seconds, her lips pursed, and then she shrugged. "I know, but he'd been sick for a long time. There was nothing I could do. Dying was only a matter of time." She said it gently, as if she were talking about something unimportant, not the death of her husband, of my son. I felt the blood boil in my veins as if my whole body was burning. "Do you think I don't know where it went? The money I sent to take care of Miguel?" I said in an ice-cold voice. "Yachts, jewelry, parties. I saw it all in the statements, Valeria." She raised an eyebrow and smiled mockingly. "That money's mine too. Are we family or not?" That sentence was like the final blow. Family. She dared to call this family after leaving Miguel to die alone in a hospital. I stared at the screen and said in a voice of steel, "This is the last party you pay for with my money." I hung up the phone without giving Valeria a chance to say anything else. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the rage burning inside me. I couldn't let her continue. I couldn't allow his cruelty to pass as if nothing had happened. I dialed the number of Lieutenant Colonel Javier Ortega, an old friend from the Army who now worked at the Military Financial Administration Agency. "Javier, I need your help," I said as soon as he answered. "Valentina, are you okay? What's going on?" His voice sounded worried, but I didn't have time to explain everything. "I'm going to your office right now. Please have the documents ready." An hour later, I was sitting in Javier's office. A small room with the smell of old wood and coffee. I placed a stack of bills on the table along with the financial power of attorney Miguel had signed for me before my last mission. Valeria spent Miguel's money, the money I sent to take care of my son, on these things, I said, pushing the documents toward Javier. He looked through them page by page, frowning. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Freeze Miguel's account right now. Cancel all linked credit cards and transfer the remaining balance to my account." Javier nodded without asking any further questions. He knew me. He knew how I acted when things went too far. In just 20 minutes, he completed all the paperwork. "Ready?" he said, handing me a receipt. "The account is blocked. The credit cards are canceled and the balance has been transferred to your name." I nodded, feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders, even though the pain was still there, sharp and constant. As I left the office, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Valeria called again and again, and I didn't answer, but the texts and voicemails started coming in. First, his voice was filled with anger. "What the hell did you do with the account? Do you think you have the right to ruin my life?" Then his tone lowered, sounding pleading. "Valentina, can we talk?" I didn't mean any harm. I just needed the money to get by. Please reopen the account. Open it. I'm sorry. I heard every message, every word, but I didn't feel a shred of compassion. Valeria didn't apologize for abandoning Miguel. She didn't even mention my son. She was only thinking about herself. I clutched my father's pocket watch in my hand. The icy metal reminded me to stand firm. I stepped outside. The sun of peace still shone brightly, but a storm brewed inside me. I returned to Miguel's house, determined to find more evidence. Anything that could unmask Valeria. In my mind, I kept seeing Miguel in the hospital bed, his cold hand and hearing his weak voice. Mom, I love you. I couldn't let him go in vain. Valeria would have to pay not only for the money, but for the cruelty that robbed her of my son. His last days. He could have lived a little longer. I could have hugged him again, heard him speak to me in a louder voice, not had to receive his body the same day I left the service, when my heart was still full of hope. I pushed open the door and entered Miguel's house, which was now just a cold shell of what it once was. I put the plastic bag with my son's belongings on the dining room table. The dim light illuminated his wristwatch and old leather wallet, reminding me of the cruel reality. Miguel was gone. I pulled up a chair, sat down, and opened the old military laptop I'd carried with me all those years of service.
The screen lit up, projecting a cold blue light onto my face. I took a deep breath, trying not to let my mind sink into the pain screaming inside me. This wasn't the time to break down. I needed to act. I needed to protect what was left of my son. I accessed the military bank account using the emergency financial authorization Miguel signed for me before I left for my last deployment. Confirmation of the account freeze order sent by Javier Ortega appeared on the screen. I went over every detail, making sure there were no loopholes where Valeria could touch Miguel's money. I also activated alerts. Any withdrawal attempt would be immediately notified to my phone. When I finished, I felt a small relief, as if I had just raised a steel wall between Valeria and what belongs to my son. Then I looked at the bank statements for the past 3 months. The numbers were stark and clear, like a wordless accusation. A series of lavish expenses: $80,000 for a party on a yacht in the Sea of Cortez, $45,000 for a dinner at a luxury restaurant in Los Cabos, $120,000 at a fashion store in La Paz. I ran through each transaction and each figure. It was like a stab in the heart. That money was my sweat and tears. The months I spent risking my life on the battlefield, thinking I was paying for Miguel's well-being. But in reality, it only fed Valeria's vanity, while my son was in the hospital alone, with no one to care for him. I took screenshots of each transaction and carefully saved them to an external hard drive and a small USB flash drive that I always carry with me. Every click was an affirmation. I'm not going to let Valeria get away with this. I'll make him pay for every peso spent, for every day he left Miguel alone. But just as he saved the last file, his phone vibrated. The number of a commercial bank appeared on the screen. A polite female voice said, "Ms. Valentina, we've received a request to withdraw money from a loan in the joint names of Ms. Valeria Lopez and Mr. Miguel Perez. Do you authorize it?" I gripped the phone tightly and answered in a firm voice. "No, I don't authorize it. Please block the credit file immediately." The employee hesitated for a moment and then confirmed. "Okay, we'll do it right away. Do you want to leave any additional instructions?" "No need," I replied and hung up. I sat in the silent living room, listening only to the creaking of the ceiling fan. I called Luis, an old friend in the telecommunications industry who had previously helped me locate devices on secret missions. "Luis, I need you to check a phone number," I said in a calm but urgent voice. "It's Valeria Lopez. I want to know where she is." Luis agreed without thinking, and just 10 minutes later he called me back. "His phone signal is offshore, in the Sea of Cortez. Probably on a boat. Should I send you the coordinates?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Send them." Thanks. It was starting to get dark, and the light through the window was turning a soft orange. I locked Miguel's house. I took the keys to his old truck. The one I used to joke was too old for a young guy. I drove to the nearest supermarket and bought water, canned food, and 3 new locks, the strongest ones they had. Upon returning, I changed all the locks on the front and back doors with each turn of the screwdriver. I imagined I was slamming Valeria's way in, blocking any further opportunity for her to take advantage. I placed military-grade duct tape with a code over each lock. A habit from my days in the army to ensure no one tampered with them while I packed Miguel's loose papers into a cardboard box. I found an old, worn, leather-bound notebook with a loose string. I opened it, and my heart leaped at the sight of Miguel's familiar handwriting. Inside was a list of the amounts of money he had given Valeria, each dated and signed by him. $30,000. March for Valeria to buy medicine. $50,000. April. Valeria said she needed money to repair the house. I flipped through the pages and noticed that many of them matched lavish spending on the statements. Valeria wasn't just spending my money. She was also tricking Miguel into believing she was using it to take care of the family. I slumped into my chair with the notebook in my hands, feeling like I'd just found the last piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just evidence, it was my son's own story. A story of betrayal she never got around to telling. I ran my hand over the page, tears rolling down my cheeks. "Miguel, I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't know what you'd had to endure."
But amidst that pain, I felt a new determination. That notebook was a key link, something that would force Valeria to face her guilt. I stood up, put the notebook in the box with the other papers, and looked around the house. Everything still bore Miguel's imprint. The armchair where he liked to read, the small photo of the 2 of us on the mantelpiece, and the smell of old wood from the floor he cleaned every weekend. I couldn't allow Valeria to come in here, to touch what belonged to my son. Never again. I clutched my father's pocket watch, which had been with me for so many years, and said to myself, "This isn't over, Miguel. I'm going to protect you even though you're gone." The next morning, I took the box with all the papers to the old naval base, where I was still allowed to use a small office after I retired. The 4th floor was simple, with an old wooden desk, a few metal chairs, and the smell of the sea drifting in through the window. I placed the box on the floor, opened it, and began laying out each document on the table. Invoices, bank statements, Miguel's notebook. Each piece of paper was a piece of the truth, and I knew I had to sort them carefully to unmask Valeria. I sat down, took a deep breath, and suppressed the pain rising in my chest. Today wasn't a day to cry. Today I needed the precision of a Marine lieutenant colonel, not the broken heart of a mother. I began comparing every expense, every line in Miguel's notebook, with the entries in the bank statements. Little by little, a clear and cruel pattern emerged, like a sentence. There were amounts that Miguel had given to Valeria in cash from the money I sent for medicine, or to fix the house. But at the same time, Valeria was withdrawing similar amounts from my son's account. Miguel once wrote $50,000 in May for Valeria to pay for hospital expenses. But the bank statement showed that $50,000 was withdrawn that same day to pay for a luxury spa in Los Cabos. I gripped the pen in my hand, my nails digging into my palm until they burned. Valeria not only took my money, she also tricked Miguel into believing she was taking care of the family, while only fueling his life of luxury. In particular, I found a series of large transactions made just after Miguel was hospitalized. An invoice caught my eye, $100,000 for organizing a birthday party for a friend of Valeria's, with the note, "Yacht Party," includes DJ and open bar. The date coincided with the day Miguel was admitted to intensive care. I stared at that number, feeling my blood boil as my son lay there, weak, struggling for every breath. Valeria was partying, laughing and spending as if nothing was happening. Pain and anger mixed together, making me want to scream, but I held back. I needed proof. I needed everything to be perfect, so she couldn't deny it. I grabbed the military scanner from the corner of the room and scanned every page. Invoices, bank statements, even Miguel's handwritten notes in his notebook. I saved 3 copies, one on the base's internal drive, one on an external drive, and one on an encrypted cloud storage service I used for classified documents. Every time I hit the save button, I felt like I was adding another brick to Miguel's wall of justice. When I finished, I turned back to my son's phone, which was still in the plastic hospital bag. The messages folder was deleted, but I didn't give up. I opened other messaging apps and luckily managed to recover some conversations in a group chat. Valeria sent a photo of a Louis Vuitton bag along with the message, "I just bought this one with Miguel's money. That guy won't live much longer." No way. I read it over and over again, and every word was like a knife in the heart. Valeria was not only taking advantage of it, but she saw my son's death as an opportunity. I continued checking Miguel's email, using the password he used on our shared accounts. Luckily, I was able to access the sent folder. I found a cruise reservation email sent from Miguel's account to an event company. The note stunned me. "Use Valentina's card. She won't be leaving the base for a long time, and if she comes back, she'll have to let me know." I slumped back in my chair with my head in my hands. Valeria wasn't just taking money from him, she was also planning everything, knowing I was far away and couldn't supervise anything. She'd taken advantage of my absence and Miguel's trust to build a life of luxury amidst my son's grief. That afternoon I took all the information to Javier Ortega's office. "Valentina, what did you get?" he asked me seriously. I put the box on the table and took out the documents and discs. Everything is here: bills, statements, messages, emails. Valeria took money from Miguel's account to spend, even when he was in the hospital. Javier reviewed some paperwork and nodded. "This is illegal enough to use as financial evidence. Want to go further?" I nodded firmly. "I want him to pay, Javier. Not just for the money, but for what he did to Miguel." He placed a hand on my shoulder with a look full of empathy. "I'll guide you through presenting this in court, but you'll need a good lawyer before leaving the base." I called Armando Ruiz, a lawyer Javier recommended to me, who specializes in family financial abuse cases. "Ms. Valentina, can I see you tomorrow morning?" Armando said over the phone in a deep, confident voice. "Bring all the evidence. We'll review it carefully." I accepted, feeling like I'd finally found an ally in this fight. "Thank you," I answered and hung up. I felt a little lighter, although the pain was still there. That night I returned to Miguel's house. I locked it. The sea breeze beat hard against the window, bringing the sound of the waves. But inside me, there was a sharp silence. I sat down in the living room. I placed all the sealed documents on the table. Beside it was my father's pocket watch, the lamplight reflecting off its worn crystal. I stroked him gently and whispered, "Miguel, Mom isn't going to let you go in vain." In my mind, every next step was clear. Valeria was wrong to think I would leave her alone. I was ready, not only for justice, but for the love of my son. Something no one, not even her, could take away from me. Early in the morning, I walked toward the center of La Paz, where Armando Ruiz's office was discreetly tucked away among low buildings. The fresh morning air contrasted with the weight on my chest, which carried both the loss of Miguel and my anger toward Valeria. With the box of files tightly tucked under my arm, I pushed open the door. The office was small and tidy, with the smell of old paper and ink on a wooden desk. There was a neatly lined stack of files, a red pencil, and a steaming cup of coffee. Armando, a man in his 40s, stood up to greet me. He shook my hand firmly, with a sharp gaze that seemed to see through my pain. "Mrs. Valentina, please sit down," he said in a deep but warm voice, pointing to the chair in front of his desk. I placed the cardboard box on the table and took out 3 carefully organized folders: bank statements, invoices, receipts, and Miguel's phone and email information. "This is all I have," I said in a dry voice, trying to remain calm, even though my heart ached every time I thought of my son. Armando nodded, opened the first folder, and quickly flipped through each page. His eyes scanned the figures, the invoices, and Valeria's cruel messages. Every now and then, he stopped, made notes with a red pencil, and muttered, "Illegal transaction, clear evidence of abandonment." I stood there, watching him work, feeling like I was putting a part of my soul in the hands of a stranger, hoping he would help me get justice for Miguel. He looked up and pushed his glasses up. "He has financial power of attorney." He brought it. I nodded and took the original document with Miguel's signature notarized at the military legal office out of my bag before I left for my last mission. Armando examined it carefully and nodded with satisfaction. "Okay, this is the key so we can control your assets." He continued reviewing the file. He focused on the yacht rental invoice and Valeria's messages about the Louis Vuitton bag. "Ms. Valentina, I've seen many cases of financial abuse, but this one—" He shook his head, a flash of indignation in his eyes. "She's not just spending money, she's also intentionally taking advantage of her son's condition. This is a deliberate act." After almost an hour of reviewing, Armando closed the files and looked me straight in the eyes. "This case is serious enough to take it to trial. We're going to request an emergency asset freezing order and the administration of Miguel's estate. With what you're giving me, I think the judge will be on our side." I nodded, feeling like I had found a ray of light in the darkness. "She's on a yacht in the Sea of Cortez," I added in a low but firm voice. "I have the location from a friend." Armando smiled coldly. His gaze was sharp. "She has no idea how quickly we'll act. Valeria thinks she can hide at sea forever, but the law doesn't wait." As I left the office, I felt a small relief, but the pain still lingered. I passed by the Palace of Justice, where the air was thick with the smell of paper and the sound of printers. I filed the request for the court to issue the asset freezing order and handed over the set of copies Armando had reviewed. A court clerk, a middle-aged woman with a tired look, received the documents and confirmed the hearing. "It will be in the next 72 hours. We'll let you know." I nodded, thanked him, and left. The peaceful sun beat down, but all I felt was cold. Everything I did was for Miguel, but every step reminded me that he wasn't here anymore. In the afternoon, I went to the military funeral home to complete Miguel's burial arrangements. The uniform I had made for him was already ready. A dark blue military uniform, just like the one I wore when I was young. The undertaker, an old veteran, put his hand on my shoulder. "He will be buried with full honors, Lieutenant Colonel Valentina," he said in a deep, sad voice. I nodded, speechless, staring at the folded uniform on the table, the small medal gleaming in the light. I pictured Miguel in that outfit, but the image only made my heart ache more. My son should be alive, smiling beside me. When I returned to Miguel's house, it was already getting dark. I opened the door, went inside, and saw a white envelope that had slipped under the door, lying on the floor. I picked it up, opened it, and found a handwritten note in Valeria's handwriting. "Valentina, we can work this out between us. I need money to pay off my debts. Please don't take things too far." I read it again. Every word was like a slap in the face. He didn't apologize. He didn't mention Miguel, not a single word of pain. It was all about money, as if my son's death was just a small obstacle in his life of luxury. I folded the letter, put it in the evidence file, and didn't respond. Valeria didn't deserve a word from me. On the morning of the trial, I stood in front of the mirror at Miguel's house, wearing the navy blue dress uniform I hadn't touched in years. The medals on my chest gleamed in the light, each one bearing a story from my days serving the country. But today, I wasn't wearing it to receive glory. I wore it to confront Valeria, to demand justice for my son. I smoothed my hair, clutched my father's pocket watch, and headed out. The sea wind blew, bringing the salty air of peace, but inside he had only cold determination. The courtroom was spacious. The white light from the neon lights fell on everything, making it look sharp and cold. The smell of old, damp wood from the benches filled the place, as if time had stopped there. I walked in with the file clutched to my chest, Armando Ruiz at my side, his sharp but serene gaze on the other side. Valeria was already seated, wearing a fitted Gucci dress, her hair neatly curled, and her newest iPhone in her hand. She was wearing heavy makeup and sharp eyeliner, but I could see the fakeness in the way she lowered her head, trying to look tired. Everyone in the room knew she was acting, but she insisted on seeing herself as a victim. The judge, a serious-faced middle-aged man, sitting high up, asked both sides to speak. Armando stood up and placed the thick file on the table, each section organized like a perfect accusation. Your Honor, we have clear evidence of financial abuse and neglect of family responsibilities by Ms. Valeria Lopez toward her husband, Mr. Miguel Perez. He began with a firm voice. He began showing on the big screen bank statements with luxury expenses, yachts, exclusive restaurants, expensive jewelry. Then, duplicate invoices proving that Valeria was withdrawing money from Miguel's account, even though he had already given her cash. Finally, he projected social media photos of Valeria smiling on a yacht, raising a cocktail glass while Miguel was in the ICU, just a few miles away. I sat there staring at each image, each one like a knife to the heart. I remembered Miguel's faint voice. Mom, I love you. And then the long beep of the heart rate monitor. Valeria didn't just take the money, she also took the last days of my son's life. Days he could have lived if he'd received proper care. I made a fist, my nails digging into my palm, trying not to cry in the living room. Valeria's lawyer, a young man in a shiny suit, stood up to answer, Your Honor, these expenses are a legal right of Mrs. Lopez as Mr. Perez's wife. Furthermore, Mr. Perez's illness was irreversible. My client cannot be held responsible. His voice was smooth, but I saw Valeria avoid my gaze as he spoke. She knew the truth, and I knew she couldn't deny it for long. Armando asked to call a witness, and Dr. Julian, who had treated Miguel, came in. He stood before the court with a deep but clear voice. If Mr. Perez had been admitted earlier and received proper care, he could have lived another 1 to 2 years. But no one contacted us. No one visited him during the 2 weeks he was in the ICU. The room fell silent, and I saw Valeria lower her head, clutching her iPhone as if trying to hide her embarrassment. The judge looked at me, signaling me to speak. I stood up, the military uniform weighing on my shoulders but giving me strength. I looked directly at Valeria, then at the judge, my voice trembling but firm. I was away to protect the country. I sent money, trusting that my son was being cared for. But no one has the right to use my absence to kill my son. When he finished, the courtroom fell silent. The only sounds were soft breathing and the sound of the court clerk's pen. Valeria lowered her head even further, but I didn't see a hint of regret in her eyes. The judge nodded. He reviewed the case file once more before testifying. The court ordered the freezing of all of Mr. Miguel Perez's assets. The provisional administration of the estate is now in the hands of Ms. Valentina Perez. Ms. Valeria Lopez is prohibited from accessing Mr. Perez's property and home until further notice. The blow of the gavel resounded dry and firm, like a final point to the hell that Valeria had caused. Valeria jumped up, her face flushed, screaming, "You're going to regret it, Valentina. You can't do this to me." Her shrill voice echoed off the walls, but the bailiffs quickly approached, asking her to leave the room. I watched as she was led away, her Gucci dress slipping out the door. And for the first time, I felt like a little justice had been done. But that didn't ease the pain. Miguel wouldn't return, and Valeria's cruelty remained a scar that would never heal in my heart. I gathered the documents, carefully packed them in my briefcase, and left the room. The midday sun in La Paz shone brightly, reflecting off my uniform and making the metals sparkle. But I felt no pride or triumph. I only felt a quiet relief, as if everything I had done had allowed me to fulfill the promise I made to Miguel, even though he was no longer here to see it. When the trial was over, I knew I had no time to rest or let the pain overwhelm me. Miguel was gone, but I had to do something to keep his legacy alive, so that what he suffered wouldn't be in vain. I drove straight to the bank, taking the court order to the counter. I completed the paperwork to obtain full control of Miguel's assets. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman with a kind expression, reviewed the documents and said, "Ms. Valentina, everything has been transferred to your name. How do you want to handle this money?" I took a deep breath and, with a firm voice, I answered, "I want to split it in two. One part for my personal account, the other to create a fund." I called the fund Fondo Miguel, a non-profit organization registered with Mexico's Ministry of Social Development that same week. The idea came to me while I was standing in the morgue, looking at Miguel's suit, ready for the funeral. I wanted my son's name to become a symbol of hope for life, for those battling the disease that Miguel couldn't overcome. I contacted San Rafael Hospital and other medical centers, asking for a list of cancer patients who had been abandoned or couldn't afford their medical expenses. A doctor from San Rafael who had cared for Miguel took my hand and said, "You're doing something very valuable, Mrs. Valentina. I'm going to help you in any way I can." In the first week alone, the Miguel Fund covered the cost of medications for 12 patients. I also signed a long-term contract with a mobile clinic to bring medical services to remote areas of Mexico where people like Miguel had been forgotten. One morning, I drove to the provincial hospital of Sonora, a few hours from La Paz, to review the list of patients the fund was supporting. The air in the hospital was stifling. The smell of disinfectant and the familiar sound of the machines squeezed my heart, reminding me of Miguel's final days. As I entered the oncology ward, I saw a little boy sitting curled up in his bed, clutching a worn-out stuffed animal with his big eyes, staring out the window. He looked about 8 years old, thin, with skin pale from chemotherapy. The doctor introduced me. "This is Diego. He lost his parents in a car accident. He has leukemia and lives alone in this room." I walked over, sat down next to the bed, and smiled softly. "Hi, Diego, it's Valentina. What are you doing?" The boy looked up and, in a low voice, said, "I don't want to die. I just want to have a family." Diego's words were like a knife straight to the heart. His clear but sad eyes were just like Miguel's. When he was little, when he hugged me and asked when I'd come home, I took his small, cold hand and said, "You're not alone. I'm here." The doctor said Diego had a chance of recovery if he received ongoing treatment and proper care. Without hesitation, I decided to use the Miguel Fund to cover all his medical expenses and hire a private nurse to take good care of him. A few weeks later, I returned to the Sonora hospital, carrying a bag of fresh oranges and a children's book I thought he would like. Diego was doing better, although he had lost almost all of his hair due to chemotherapy. His eyes shone, and for the first time, I saw him smile. An innocent smile that warmed my soul. I sat next to him and told him about the days I used to paddle across the Sea of Cortez, about the big waves and the bright sunsets. Diego listened attentively, stroking his stuffed animal. "Ms. Valentina, have you ever been afraid at sea?" he asked curiously. I smiled and stroked his head. "Of course, but I learned that no matter how big the waves are, if you hold the paddle tight, you'll always make it to the other side." Every time I visited, I brought his favorite food, homemade flan, mango juice, or chocolate chip cookies. I sat next to him, helping him eat spoonful by spoonful, cleaning his mouth when he made a mess. Those moments made me feel like I was taking care of Miguel again, like I was getting back what I couldn't give him before. Diego began to open up more, telling me about his dream of being an astronaut and traveling to Mars.
"I want to see the whole world from above," she said, her eyes blazing. I nodded, tears wanting to flow, but I held them back and just smiled. "You'll make it, Diego. I believe in you." One afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the hospital, Diego took my hand with a dubious look. "Mrs. Valentina, can you be my grandmother?" The boy's question paralyzed me, as if the entire world had stopped at that instant. I looked into Diego's clear eyes. I saw Miguel's reflection and felt my heart heal a little. I approached him, hugged him tightly, and tears rolled down my cheeks. "Of course, Diego. I'll be your grandmother.
The boy hugged me tightly. The stuffed animal was squashed between us, and I could feel the warmth emanating from his fragile body. That same day, I began the process for the legal adoption. I contacted the Department of Social Affairs, prepared the paperwork, and arranged a small room in Miguel's house for Diego. I painted the walls navy blue, the color Diego said he liked because it resembles the sky. I bought a single bed and a small table, and placed his stuffed animal on his pillow. Each step of the preparation was a promise to myself. I wouldn't let Diego be alone, like me. I accidentally left Miguel. The bottom line. Miguel wasn't just my son's legacy. Now he was also the bridge that led me to Diego, a child who brought light to my darkest days. 6 months after the trial, I received a call from the doctor at the Sonora Province Hospital. "Ms. Valentina, I have good news," he said enthusiastically on the other end of the line. "Diego has responded well to the treatment. The latest tests show that there are no more cancer cells." I stood motionless in the kitchen, holding the phone tightly as tears streamed down my cheeks. Diego, the boy I met in a cold hospital room, now had a chance at life. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'll be right there." I rushed to get everything ready and brought a small gift bag with me, a blue wool hat I had knitted for Diego, hoping he'd like it. The day Diego left the hospital, I drove Miguel's old truck to Sonora. The boy stood in the doorway, thin but bright-eyed, clutching his worn-out stuffed animal. Seeing me, he ran towards me with a smile as radiant as the sun. "Grandma!" she shouted, throwing herself into my arms. I hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of his small body, and at that moment, I saw Miguel's shadow. "Come on, grandson," I said, stroking his head. "Let's go home." We climbed into the truck. The sound of the Sea of Cortez drifted in from a distance, and the familiar salty smell wafted through the window. Miguel's house had now become their home. Their first dinner at home was simple but warm. I cooked tacos, Diego's favorite dish, with ground beef and homemade tomato salsa. Diego carefully placed his stuffed animal next to Miguel's picture frame on the shelf. Then he looked at me shyly and asked, "Do you think Uncle Miguel would have loved me?" I smiled and put my hand on his shoulder. "Of course, Diego. Uncle Miguel would be very proud of you." The boy nodded. His eyes lit up, and he returned to the table to take a big bite of his taco, laughing when the salsa dripped onto his chin. I wiped his mouth, feeling a small but real joy, as if I were reliving the days with Miguel. In the following weeks, I began to change the house so that it would truly be Diego's and my home. I painted the living room sand-colored, a warm hue that I thought would bring freshness. On the terrace, I planted bougainvillea, its red flowers swaying in the sea breeze. In the backyard, I placed a new hammock, where Diego liked to lie down to read or watch the sunset. Miguel's things, books, clothes, some photos. I stored them carefully in a wooden closet. Not to forget them, but to keep my son's memory intact. Every time I opened the closet, I would touch his favorite jacket and whisper, "You're still here, right?" I continued to direct the fund, Miguel, expanding its activities to the mountainous areas of Oaxaca and Chiapas. The fund has helped dozens of cancer patients receive early treatment. People I know who, without that help, could have met the same fate as Miguel. Diego usually sits next to me at the table, doing homework or drawing. He drew me in a military uniform, standing next to him, with the deep blue Sea of Cortez behind me. "This is you and me, Grandma," Diego said, handing me the drawing with his eyes shining with pride. I hugged him, feeling my heart slowly heal in moments like this. Once a month, I take Diego to participate in the Miguel Fund volunteer group, taking neighbors and food to distant communities. Diego quickly integrated, running with other children and handing out gifts with a radiant smile. "Grandma Valentina, can I bring more candy next time?" she asked, holding a packet of cookies she had just handed me. "Sure, but you have to ask Grandma's permission first," I replied, winking at him as I watched him laugh and play. I felt a part of Miguel come back to life, as if my son were watching us and smiling from somewhere. I started joining the senior kayaking club in Puerto de La Paz. Early every morning, I paddled over small waves, feeling the cool water touch my hands, reminiscing about my days of training at sea. But now I rowed for pleasure, for the peace I thought I would never find again. Sometimes Diego would sit on the shore, waving his hand and shouting, "Row faster, Grandma. A fish is following you." I laughed out loud, feeling my heart lighter every day. Every afternoon, Diego and I would go to the small vegetable garden behind the house. He planted tomatoes, and I grew herbs. The first season, we harvested a basketful, and that night, Diego helped me cook pasta with fresh tomato sauce. "It's better than tacos, Grandma," he exclaimed, his mouth full of sauce. I smiled as I stroked his head, feeling a simple happiness I never thought I'd feel again. From time to time, lawyer Armando called to let me know that Valeria was still trying to sue or claim property. "She just filed another request, but the judge rejected it," Armando said calmly. "Don't worry, everything's under control." I nodded at the phone without responding to any of Valeria's messages. She was no longer part of my life, and I didn't want to waste a second thinking about her. One morning, Diego came running home from school with a valedictorian diploma in his hand, and a smile as radiant as the sun. "Grandma Valentina, I got the highest grade in the class," he told me, skipping across the garden. I was sitting in my usual wooden chair, holding my father's pocket watch, the light reflecting off the worn glass. "Very good, Diego," I said, hugging him as I watched him run and laugh his innocent laugh, mingling with the sound of the waves. I knew Miguel was still here, in every heartbeat of this new life I'm protecting. That same day, I hung a new photo on the wall, right next to the one I have with Miguel. Diego and I, on the shore of the Sea of Cortez, in the same place where Miguel played as a child. I stuck a note next to it that said, "Miguel is always with us." I stepped back. I looked at the two photos, and for the first time in many years, I felt like I had truly come home. Not to a house made only of brick and wood, but to a home of love and hope, the one Diego and I are building together, and where Miguel will live forever in our hearts. The story we're telling is fictional, but it's based on some real events. Names and locations have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We're not telling this to judge, but rather with the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I'm truly curious. If you were me, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. In the meantime, on the final screen, I'll leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you, they'll surprise you. Thanks for staying this far.